She found a map in her grandfather's Bible. It led to a barn no one knew existed. What she discovered inside wasn't just about her past, but about a future she never thought she could have. And if a story like this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, then you're in the right place. Go ahead and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you've ever had to find your own way home. This story is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to be a ward of the state. There was no cake, no party, just a cardboard box containing 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read 100 times, and a social worker named Carol who smelled faintly of mints and paperwork. She stood by the door of the Northgate Youth Residence, her expression a careful blend of professional sympathy and a deep-seated weariness I was only just beginning to understand. The air was cold for May, a sharp, wet chill that clung to the brick of the building, making it look even more like the prison it had always felt like. 2 years. 2 years of my name on a chart, my meals on a schedule, my life in a file folder. Now the lock was turning. "Everything's in the envelope, Alara," Carol said, her voice flat. "Bus pass, the address for the lawyer, a list of shelters in the city, just in case." Just in case. The 2 most terrifying words in the English language. They meant, "We've done our part, now you're on your own. Good luck not drowning." I took the manila envelope. It was heavy, weighted with the bureaucracy of my newfound freedom. I didn't look inside. I knew what I'd find. Forms, pamphlets, the flimsy architecture of a life I was supposed to build from scratch. I looked past her, through the reinforced glass of the door, at the gray street outside. A city bus hissed at the curb, its brakes sighing like a tired animal. That was my ride away from here. Away from everything I had known since my grandfather died. I nodded, because speaking felt impossible. My throat was a knot of grief and fear so tight it ached. Carol gave a small, almost imperceptible nod back. "He would have been proud of you, Alara, your grandfather." The words were meant to be kind, a final, gentle push out of the nest, but they felt like stones. How could he be proud? He was gone, and I was here. A charity case with a bus pass and an appointment with a lawyer I'd never met. I clutched the box to my chest. The corners dug into my arms. "Thank you, Carol," I managed to say, the words tasting like rust. She gave my shoulder a brief, awkward squeeze. "Be smart. Be safe." And then she stepped back, and the heavy door clicked shut behind me, leaving me on the outside for the first time in 730 days. The air tasted different out here. It was thinner, sharper, full of the exhaust of the city and the smell of rain on hot asphalt. It smelled like possibility and terror in equal measure. I took a breath, and another. Then I walked toward the bus, the cardboard box my only anchor in a world that had suddenly gone vast and empty. The journey to the lawyer's office was a blur of unfamiliar streets and faces. I sat with my box on my lap, staring out the window as the neighborhoods shifted from the grim concrete of the inner city to the leafy, quiet avenues of the professional district. Each block felt like a different country. Here, the buildings were made of glass and steel, and the people moved with a purpose I couldn't comprehend. They had places to be, lives that fit them. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edge of their world. Mr. Davies's office was on the 7th floor of one of these glass towers. The lobby was silent, except for the whisper of the air conditioning and the soft chime of the elevator. A woman with a headset and a plastic smile directed me down a long hallway, carpeted in a deep, sound-absorbing gray. The whole place felt designed to make you feel small. It was working. Mr. Davies was older than I expected, a man who seemed to be made entirely of tweed and soft, wrinkled lines. His office smelled of old books and leather. He didn't smile when I came in, just gestured to a chair opposite his massive oak desk. The chair swallowed me. He cleared his throat, shuffling a thin file that had my name on it. "Miss Elara Vance," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "I was your grandfather's solicitor. I handled his affairs after his passing." He didn't say he was sorry for my loss. I appreciated that. Sympathy from strangers felt like a debt I couldn't repay. I just nodded. "He didn't have much," Mr. Davies continued, getting straight to the point. "A bit of debt, actually. But he was adamant that what little there was should pass to you on your 18th birthday. He slid a document across the desk. It was a property deed. "This is a parcel of land, about 20 acres, with a small farmhouse up in Westmoreland County. It's been in your family for generations." My heart gave a small, stupid leap. A house. A home. He held up a hand, as if sensing my hope. "Don't get excited. The house is, by all accounts, derelict. The property taxes haven't been paid in 3 years. The county has a lien on it. To be frank, the land is worth less than the debt attached to it." He let that sink in. The little leap in my chest collapsed. Of course, there was always a catch. "However," he said, steepling his fingers, "there is an interested party. A development group has been trying to acquire the surrounding parcels for a new resort. They've made an offer." He named a number. It wasn't a fortune, but to me, it might as well have been the moon. It was enough to get an apartment, to go to community college, to not have to use the list of shelters in my envelope. It was a way out. They'll pay off the back taxes and give you the remainder. It's a clean break, Miss Vance. My advice, as your legal counsel, is to take the offer. Sign the papers, and you can walk out of here with a check and a fresh start. He slid another set of papers toward me, next to a pen. A clean break. A fresh start. It was everything I was supposed to want. But I looked at his face, calm and pragmatic, and I thought of my grandfather. He wasn't a man who valued clean breaks. He was a man who fixed things, who patched and mended and held on. Why would he leave me something that was meant to be immediately discarded? Did he leave anything else? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Davies seemed surprised by the question. He reached under his desk and pulled out a small, dusty cardboard box sealed with yellowing tape. Just this. His personal effects. The state sent them to me when you were placed in the system. Mostly sentimental value, I'm afraid. He pushed it across the desk. It was no bigger than a shoebox. I looked from the box to the contract, from the pen to the promise of a check. A clean break. Or a dusty box. For the first time all day, a choice that was actually mine. I pulled the box toward me. "I want to see the property first," I said. Mr. Davies sighed, a quiet puff of air. It was the sound of a man who had given good advice that was about to be ignored. "As you wish," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The bus to Westmoreland leaves at 3. I didn't take the check. I took the bus. The 3 o'clock Greyhound was an old machine, rumbling and groaning its way out of the city's concrete embrace. I sat by a grimy window, the dusty box from Mr. Davies on the seat beside me, my other box of clothes tucked at my feet. I was the only person on board under the age of 60. The city fell away in stages. First the skyscrapers, then the mid-rise apartments, then the endless stretches of suburban houses with their neat lawns and identical mailboxes. After an hour, the houses grew farther apart, separated by fields and patches of woods. The highway narrowed from 4 lanes to 2. The sky seemed to get bigger, a vast, pale blue canvas that dwarfed everything beneath it. I watched the transformation with a hollow feeling in my chest. Every mile was a mile further from the only life I knew, even if it was a life I was desperate to escape. I was trading a familiar cage for an unknown wilderness. The bus smelled of diesel and stale air freshener. An old woman across the aisle was asleep, her mouth open, a paperback romance novel fallen to the floor. The driver had a talk radio station playing quietly, a low murmur of angry voices I couldn't quite make out. It was the soundtrack of my departure. I thought about my grandfather, Arthur. The last time I'd seen him, I was 10. He smelled of sawdust and pipe tobacco. He had calloused hands that could fix anything: a broken toy, a leaky faucet, a scraped knee. He taught me how to tie a fisherman's knot and how to find the North Star. After my parents died, he was my whole world. And then one day, he was just gone. A heart attack, they said, quick and sudden. And just like that, my world had been dismantled. The state stepped in, and the next 8 years of my life were a series of sterile rooms and sympathetic but powerless adults. I tried to hold on to his memory, but it was fading, worn smooth by time and the relentless, grinding reality of the system. Now, all I had left of him was a piece of land I'd never seen and a box of sentimental junk. Was this a pilgrimage or a fool's errand? I didn't know. The bus ride was 3 hours long. 3 hours to sit and think, to second-guess my decision 1,000 times. The developer's offer echoed in my head. A clean break, a fresh start. It was safe. It was sensible. Carol would have told me to take it. Mr. Davies had told me to take it. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that I had made a huge mistake. But something else, a quieter, deeper part of me, felt a strange sense of rightness. It was a stubborn, illogical loyalty to a man who had been gone for almost a decade. He had left this for me. Not for a developer, not for the county, but for me. The least I could do was look at it. The bus finally wheezed into the town of Westmoreland. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a general store. The driver called out the stop, and I was the only one who got off. He handed me my box from the storage compartment underneath. "That's it for the line," he said, not unkindly. "Bus back to the city is tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Don't miss it." He assumed I'd be going back. Everyone assumed I'd be going back. I watched the bus pull away, its red taillights shrinking in the twilight until they were gone, leaving me alone in the sudden, profound silence of the countryside. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine trees. It was a world away from the city. I looked at the address on the envelope Mr. Davies had given me. 4 miles. 4 miles down a road with no sidewalks and no streetlights. I picked up my boxes and started walking. The road was paved for the first mile, then it turned to gravel. The sun had set, and the world was painted in shades of deep blue and purple. The trees on either side of the road formed a dark canopy overhead, and the only light came from a sliver of moon. The sounds of the city were replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of unseen things in the woods. Every snapped twig sounded like a footstep behind me. I walked faster. The boxes were heavy, and my arms ached. I had to switch them from side to side, my cheap sneakers slipping on the loose gravel. This was a mistake. A cold, lonely, stupid mistake. I should have taken the money. I could be in a warm, dry motel room right now, looking at apartment listings. Instead, I was in the middle of nowhere, walking toward a ruin. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted, tilting mailbox, half swallowed by overgrown bushes. The name Vance was still faintly visible, painted in peeling white letters. This was it. I turned onto a dirt driveway, even more overgrown than the road. The trees pressed in close, their branches scraping the sides of the path. And then, the woods opened up, and I saw the house. Derelict was the right word. It was a small, 2-story farmhouse, but its bones were broken. The porch roof sagged in the middle like a tired old man's shoulders. Several windows were boarded up, and the ones that weren't were dark, empty eyes. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood a weathered, ghostly gray. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it nearly buckled my knees. This wasn't a house, it was a corpse. I had traded everything for this. For a moment, I just stood there in the dark, the crickets my only audience, and let the sheer hopelessness of it all sink in. Then, a flicker of my grandfather's stubbornness sparked inside me. I had come this far. I wasn't going to sleep in the dirt. I walked up the creaking steps of the porch, my footsteps loud in the silence. The front door was locked, but the wood around the knob was so rotten that a firm push was all it took. The door swung inward with a groan of protest, opening into a darkness that felt absolute. It smelled of dust, mildew, and time. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold and nerves. I switched on the flashlight, and the thin beam cut through the gloom. The light landed on a living room frozen in time. Furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the small circle of light. Dust motes danced in the beam like tiny fairies. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. This was his house. My grandfather had walked these floors, sat in these chairs. I could almost feel the echo of his presence. I explored cautiously, my phone's light sweeping across the room. A stone fireplace. A sagging armchair. A bookshelf filled with rotting books. I ran my fingers along a dusty mantelpiece. My hand came away black. In the kitchen, a calendar was still pinned to the wall, flipped to a month from 8 years ago. I left it there. I couldn't bring myself to climb the stairs to the second floor. Not yet. I went back to the living room, found a spot on the floor that looked relatively clean, and set down my boxes. I sat with my back against a sheet-draped sofa, my knees pulled up to my chest. The silence in the house was different from the silence outside. It was a heavy, listening silence. I finally opened the small box from Mr. Davies's office. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were the personal effects. A tarnished silver pocket watch that didn't tick. A handful of faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, except for a younger version of my grandfather standing proudly next to a new-looking truck. And at the bottom, a heavy, leather-bound Bible, its cover worn smooth with use. It felt warm in my hands, solid. It was the only thing in this whole, broken-down place that felt real. I opened it. The pages were thin and delicate, filled with his spidery handwriting in the margins. Notes, thoughts, underlined verses. It was a conversation he had been having with himself, with God, for years. As I turned a page in the Book of Psalms, something fell out and fluttered to the dusty floor. It wasn't a bookmark. It was a small, folded piece of paper, brittle with age. I picked it up carefully and unfolded it under the beam of my phone. It was a map. Hand-drawn in my grandfather's familiar ink. It showed the house, the driveway, the main road. But it also showed a path leading away from the back of the house, through the woods, to a location marked with a simple, stark X. Next to the X, he had written 2 words. The Ark. The map was a puzzle. I held it in my trembling hands, the thin beam of my phone's flashlight making the ink seem to writhe. The Ark. What did that even mean? I looked at the drawing. It showed the property lines, the creek that ran along the western edge, the dense patch of woods behind the house. The path he had drawn didn't follow any logical trail. It cut straight through the thickest part of the forest, over a ridge that wasn't visible from the house. There was no barn, no shed, no outbuilding marked on the official property survey Mr. Davies had shown me. According to the county, this house and the woods were all that was here. but the map in my hand told a different story. My grandfather wasn't a fanciful man. If he drew a map, it led somewhere. Sleep was impossible now. The exhaustion I'd felt was burned away by a new, sharp energy. A mystery. A secret. It was the first interesting thing that had happened to me in years. I had to know. Waiting for daylight felt like an eternity, but I knew trying to navigate the woods in the dark with only a phone light was a recipe for disaster. I spent the rest of the night in the dusty armchair, the Bible in my lap and the map in my hand, dozing in fits and starts, my dreams filled with tangled paths and hidden doors. As soon as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the grimy windows, I was on my feet. I ate a stale granola bar from my box, my only food, and drank from a bottle of water, then headed out the back door. The air was cool and misty, and the world looked soft and unreal. The backyard was a jungle of weeds and thorny bushes. I used the map, orienting myself with the corner of the house and a large ancient oak tree that stood like a sentinel at the edge of the woods. The path on the map started there. There was no path in reality. I had to push my way through shoulder-high brambles that tore at my clothes and skin. The woods grew dense quickly. Sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy of leaves, and the ground was a damp carpet of moss and fallen leaves that muffled my footsteps. It was like stepping into another world. I kept the map in one hand, my phone in the other, using its compass to keep my bearings. Every few minutes, I would stop, listen, and check the drawing. A fallen log, a sharp bend in the creek. He had included small, subtle landmarks. It was a trail only he, or someone with his map, could follow. After 20 minutes of pushing through the undergrowth, I was scratched, sweating, and starting to doubt myself. This was crazy. I was chasing a ghost's fantasy through a forest. I was about to turn back when I saw it. A faint indentation in the ground, almost completely overgrown, but just visible if you knew what to look for. An old track, a road that hadn't been used in decades. It matched the line on the map. My heart started beating faster. I followed the track as it curved up a gentle rise. The trees here were even bigger, ancient pines that stood in silent ranks. The air grew still. At the top of the ridge, the track leveled out, and I saw a wall. Not a wall of stone or brick, but a wall of green. A solid, impenetrable curtain of ivy and overgrown bushes, at least 30 feet high. It looked like a natural feature, a hill covered in vegetation. But the map said this was it, the X. I pushed at the ivy. It was thick and tangled, a stubborn web of vines. I put my shoulder into it and pushed harder. Behind the first layer of leaves, I felt something solid, something flat. Wood. It was a building, completely swallowed by the forest. I tore at the vines, my fingers raw, pulling down great handfuls of green, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. It was a door, a massive, sliding barn door. It took me another 10 minutes of frantic work to clear enough of the ivy to see the sheer scale of the structure. It was a huge barn, at least twice the size of the farmhouse, and it had been so masterfully hidden by the encroaching nature that you could have walked right past it and never known it was there. My grandfather had hidden a whole barn. The doors were stuck fast, their runners rusted, the wood swollen with years of damp. I put my hands on the cold, rough wood and pushed. Nothing. I braced my feet and threw my entire weight against it. A low groan echoed from inside, but the door didn't move an inch. I was small, and the door was immense. It felt like another test. I looked around, my eyes scanning the ground. I found a thick, fallen branch about 6 feet long. A lever. I wedged it into the gap between the two massive doors and pulled. The wood creaked. I put my back into it, my muscles screaming in protest. The branch bent, threatening to snap. And then, with a deafening screech of metal on metal, the door moved. Just an inch, but it was enough. I worked the lever back and forth, gaining a few inches with each agonizing push. Finally, the gap was wide enough for me to squeeze through. I slipped into the darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air inside was still and cold, and it smelled of dust, old hay, and something else. Oil. And gasoline. It was a smell I recognized from the photograph, the smell of a vehicle. I fumbled for my phone again, my hands shaking. I turned on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the blackness, landing on a shape in the center of the vast, cavernous space. It was huge, and it was covered by a thick, gray canvas tarp. Whatever the ark was, it was right in front of me. The silence in the barn was absolute. It was a dead, heavy quiet, the kind that presses in on your ears. Dust motes, thick as snowflakes, swirled in the beam of my phone's light. The tarp-covered shape dominated the center of the space. It was long and high, the size of a large truck or a small boat. My breath plumed in the cold air. For a long moment, I just stood there, just inside the door, too afraid to move. My mind was racing. Why go to all this trouble? Why hide a barn and whatever was inside it so completely? This went far beyond just letting a place get overgrown. This was deliberate. This was a secret, kept for years. I took a tentative step forward, my worn sneakers making no sound on the packed earth floor. The barn was much larger from the inside. The ceiling soared up into darkness, crisscrossed with massive wooden beams. Along one wall were workbenches covered in dusty tools, neatly arranged as if waiting for a craftsman to return. Jars of nails and screws lined the shelves, their contents organized by size. My grandfather. This had his fingerprints all over it. Order in the midst of chaos. I reached the edge of the tarp. The canvas was stiff and heavy with a thick layer of dust. It felt like touching a relic in a tomb. I grabbed a corner, the fabric rough against my skin. I took a deep breath, and with a single, decisive pull, I yanked the tarp back. It came away with a loud whoosh that echoed in the silent space, releasing a cloud of dust that made me cough. Underneath, gleaming softly in the flashlight's beam, was a truck. It was an old Ford, maybe from the late 60s or early 70s, its paint a deep, lustrous forest green. It wasn't just a truck, it was perfect. The chrome grille and bumper were spotless, free of rust. The tires were fully inflated. It looked like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. It was the truck from the photograph in the box. The one my grandfather had been standing next to, beaming with pride. It was pristine. Impossible. A vehicle this old, sitting in a barn for who knows how long, should have been a wreck of rust and flat tires. But this was a time capsule. I ran my hand along the cool metal of the fender. It was real. I walked around it, my light playing over every detail. It was beautiful, a monument to a different time. But why? Why hide it? As the initial shock began to wear off, the questions came flooding back, harder this time. This wasn't just a sentimental hobby. This was an asset, a valuable one. Why wouldn't he sell it? Why wouldn't he use it? Why let it sit here and rot, or not rot, as the case may be, while he fell into debt and his granddaughter ended up in the system? The thought was a splash of ice water. A seed of resentment started to sprout in the confusion. Just then, a shrill, alien sound cut through the silence. My phone was ringing. The caller ID read, "Davies, legal." I almost didn't answer. I wanted to stay here in this dusty sanctuary, in this mystery. But the real world was calling. I swiped to answer, my voice a croak. "Hello? Miss Vance, Alara. I'm glad I reached you." Mr. Davies's voice was crisp, businesslike. It felt like an intrusion from another planet. "I trust you've had a chance to look around?" The dry tone was not lost on me. He thought I was sitting in a ruin, regretting my life choices. "I'm here," I said. "Well, I have some news. The developers are very eager to close on this parcel. They've increased their offer substantially." He named a new number. It was double the first one. It was an absurd amount of money. It was life-changing. It was enough to make all of this, the debt, the derelict house, the confusing, hidden barn, disappear. "They want an answer by the end of the day," he said. "It's a very generous final offer, Alara. I strongly advise you to take it. You can be on a bus back to the city this evening with a certified check in your pocket." I looked at the truck. I looked at the dark, silent barn. I thought of the crumbling house and the years of neglect. The money was a siren song. It was easy. It was freedom. It was a way to wash my hands of a past I didn't understand and a family legacy that felt more like a burden than a gift. All I had to do was say yes. And you know, there are moments in your life that are hinges. The door of your future can swing open or closed on a single word. Have you ever been there? Standing in front of a choice where one path is easy, paved, and well lit, and the other is dark, overgrown, and leads you God knows where. A lot of people would say take the easy path. Take the money. Don't look back. And maybe they're right. But if you've made it this far into my story, maybe you're the kind of person who understands why I couldn't. If you get it, let me know in the comments. Because what I did next, it wasn't the smart thing to do. It was just the only thing I could. "I need more time," I said into the phone. The words came out before I had even consciously decided on them. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence freighted with a lawyer's disapproval. "Miss Vance," Mr. Davies said, his tone shifting from persuasive to paternalistic. "This is not a decision that benefits from prolonged deliberation. The offer is on the table now. It may not be there tomorrow." "I understand," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of firmness. "I still need more time. I'll call you back." I hung up before he could argue further. The silence of the barn rushed back in, but this time it felt different. It felt like my own. I had claimed it. My decision, whether it was the right one or not, had made this space mine. My focus returned to the truck. The money was an abstraction, a number spoken over a phone line. This truck was real. It was solid. It was a tangible link to the man who had built this secret. I walked to the driver's side and pulled on the handle. The door opened with a well-oiled click. No rust, no resistance. The inside smelled of clean vinyl and old, settled air. I slid onto the bench seat. The steering wheel was huge, thin, and elegant. The dashboard was a simple sweep of painted metal with beautiful chrome, ringed gauges. A key was in the ignition. On instinct, I turned it. Nothing happened, of course. The battery would have been dead for years. But the act of turning it felt significant, a claim of ownership. My eyes scanned the simple interior. The floor was clean. The headliner was intact. And there, on the passenger side, was the glove compartment. My heart gave a little thump. Glove compartments were for secrets. I leaned across the seat and fumbled with the latch. It clicked open. I swung the little door down. I was expecting to find an old owner's manual, maybe a desiccated map. But it was empty, except for a heavy, dark green metal box. It was a military-style ammo can, or something that looked like one. It was heavy. I lifted it out and set it on the seat beside me. There was a latch on the front, but it was secured with a small, sturdy padlock. No key. Of course, it was never going to be that easy. I felt a surge of frustration, so intense it was almost a physical blow. It was another locked door, another puzzle. I was so close to something. I could feel it, but I was locked out. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, the frustration threatening to boil over into tears. I looked at the box. I could take it to a locksmith, I could go back to the city, find someone to cut it open. Or, I remembered the workbenches. I got out of the truck, carrying the heavy box with me. I placed it on one of the dusty benches and shone my light over the rows of tools hanging on the pegboard behind it. Hammers, wrenches, saws, and there, at the end, a long, heavy crowbar. It felt heavy and powerful in my hands. This was a bad idea. I was about to destroy a lock, possibly damage the box and whatever was inside. It felt like a violation. But waiting wasn't an option. The momentum was on my side. I had to know what was in this box. Now, I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the hasp next to the small padlock. I took a breath and pushed. The metal of the box groaned in protest. The padlock held firm. This was a fight. I adjusted my grip, planted my feet, and put my entire body weight into it. My muscles strained, the tendons in my arms screaming. The crowbar was biting into the lid of the box, bending the metal. It was ugly, destructive. For a second, I thought of my grandfather, the careful craftsman, and felt a pang of guilt. He would have had the key. He would have done this elegantly. But I wasn't him. I was his granddaughter, desperate and running on instinct. I gave one last, furious heave. There was a sharp crack as the padlock's hasp tore free from the lid, followed by the shriek of tortured metal. The lid sprang open. I dropped the crowbar with a clatter and stared, panting, at the contents. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a weapon. It was paper. The box was filled to the brim with bundles of cash, old bills, 20s and 50s, bound with simple rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. And on top of the money, there was a stack of envelopes tied together with a piece of butcher's twine. The top envelope was addressed in my grandfather's familiar, spidery script. It said, "For my Starling, on her 18th birthday." Starling. That was his name for me. I hadn't heard it, or even thought of it, in 8 years. A wave of emotion so powerful it felt like grief hit me, and I sank to the dusty floor, the open box in my lap, tears streaming down my face. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold floor of the barn, crying. I cried for my grandfather, for the 8 years we'd lost. I cried for the lonely, confused little girl I had been, and for the lost, uncertain young woman I had become. I cried for the sheer, overwhelming relief of seeing his handwriting, of hearing his voice in my head through that single, stupid nickname. Starling. He hadn't forgotten. After the tears subsided, a strange calm settled over me. I picked up the stack of letters and wiped my dusty hands on my jeans. I climbed back into the cab of the old truck, the metal box of money on the floor at my feet. The bench seat felt like the safest place in the world. I untied the brittle twine, and the letters separated into a thick stack. I took the one from the top, the one addressed to me. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from cold or fear. It was anticipation. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the pages within. The letter was long, written on thin, yellowed paper. I angled my phone so the light fell across the page and began to read. "My dearest Starling," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means several things. It means you are 18. It means you are safe. And it means you are stubborn enough not to listen to that lawyer Davies. Good girl. I always knew you had my blood in you." A small, watery laugh escaped my lips. Even from beyond the grave, he knew me. "I imagine you have a lot of questions," the letter continued. "And I imagine you might be angry. You have every right to be. I owe you an explanation. I owe you the truth. The story they told you, the story the state believes, is that I died and left you with nothing but debt and a broken-down farm. That's not the truth. It's a lie. But it's a lie I built myself, carefully, piece by piece, to protect you, to protect this place for you." I read on, my eyes devouring the words. He explained it all in his simple, direct way. The debt on the property wasn't real. After the accident that took my parents, he knew that powerful people in the county wanted his land. They saw a grieving old man with a young child as an easy target. They would have used eminent domain, legal loopholes, anything to take it. So he created a defense. He worked with a discreet, out-of-state law firm, not Davies, to place a series of complex, private liens against his own property. He made the farm look, on paper, like it was hopelessly entangled in debt, making it an unattractive and complicated target for acquisition. It was a fortress made of paperwork. It was the only way, he wrote, to make the land seem worthless until the one person it had value to, you, was old enough to claim it. Davies doesn't even know. He's a local man, a good man, but I couldn't risk him being part of it. His role was simply to hold the deed and pass it to you. The real documents, the ones that clear all the false debt, are in this box. I looked down at the box. Beneath the stacks of cash, there was a heavy, oilskin-wrapped package. The proof. The key to it all. He went on to explain about the money. For years after I was taken by the state, a decision that he wrote was the single greatest regret of his life, forced on him by a court that deemed a grieving, single grandfather an unfit guardian. He had worked. He took cash jobs, logging, mechanic work, anything. He lived on almost nothing, pouring every spare dollar into this box. It's not a fortune, he wrote, but it should be enough. Enough for the taxes. Enough to fix the roof. Enough to give you a choice. That's all I ever wanted for you, Ilara. A real choice. Not the kind they give you in a file folder. He wrote about the truck, the Ark. He had restored it from a rust bucket, a project that took him years. It was his masterpiece. It wasn't just a truck. It was his hope. I called it the Ark because I hoped it would carry you to a new beginning, he wrote. It represents the best of me, the part that builds and restores, not the part that breaks. I wanted you to have that. I wanted you to know that part of me. The last page of the letter was about my parents. He told me stories about them I'd never heard, about my mother's laugh and my father's kindness. He filled in the gaps of my memory, painting a picture not of a tragedy, but of a life, a family, a home. This land isn't just dirt and trees, Starling, he wrote at the end. It's our story. It's your story. What you do with it is up to you. You can sell it. You can walk away. There would be no shame in that. But I hope you'll stay. I hope you'll see what I see. Not a ruin, but a foundation. A place to build. I finished the letter, and the pages were stained with new tears. But these were different. They weren't tears of grief, but of understanding. Of release. The story of my life had been a story of abandonment. A grandfather who died and left me, a system that forgot me. But it was all wrong. It wasn't a story of abandonment at all. It was a story of fierce, desperate, and complicated protection. It was a love story. He hadn't left me. He had been here all along, building a fortress around my future. The sun was high in the sky when I finally emerged from the barn, blinking in the bright light. The world looked different. The colors were sharper, the air cleaner. The weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for 8 years, the weight of being unwanted, of being a burden, was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something solid and heavy, but in a good way. It felt like an inheritance. Not the money in the box, but the truth in the letters. I walked back through the woods, but this time I wasn't pushing through a hostile wilderness. I was walking on my own land. The path felt clearer. The trees felt like they were standing guard, not menacing me. When I reached the house, it no longer looked like a corpse. It looked like a project. The sagging porch, the peeling paint, the boarded windows. They weren't signs of decay anymore. They were a to-do list. They were a challenge. My grandfather had built his fortress of lies to protect this place. Now it was my turn to build it back into a home. I sat on the porch steps, the oilskin package of legal documents in my lap, and I pulled out my phone. I had one more call to make. The phone rang twice before Mr. Davies picked up. "Miss Vance," he said, and I could hear the impatience in his voice. "Have you come to a decision? The developers are waiting." "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't waver. "I've made a decision." "Excellent," he said, a note of relief in his voice. "I'll have the paperwork couriered to you for a signature." "No," I interrupted. "You misunderstand. My decision is that I'm rejecting the offer." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could almost hear him blinking, recalibrating. "Miss Vance, Ilara," he said, his voice slow and careful, as if speaking to a child. "Perhaps you don't understand the situation. The back taxes, the liens, you'll lose the property anyway. Taking this deal is the only way you walk away with anything." "Actually," I said, and I couldn't help the small smile that touched my lips, "I think you're the one who misunderstands the situation. The liens on this property are fraudulent. I have the documentation to prove it. My grandfather set this all up to protect the land." I could practically feel his shock through the phone. I explained about the out-of-state law firm, the private liens, the whole elaborate scheme. I didn't tell him about the barn or the money. That was my secret, my inheritance. But I told him enough. "I'll be keeping the property, Mr. Davies," I said finally. "And I'll be using a portion of my liquid assets to settle the outstanding property tax bill with the county first thing next week. Please inform the developers that the Vance property is officially off the market. Permanently." Liquid assets. The phrase sounded so foreign, so adult. But the cash in that box was very real and very liquid. There was another long pause. When he finally spoke, Mr. Davies's voice had changed. The condescension was gone, replaced by a note of something that sounded almost like respect. "I see," he said. "Well, it appears your grandfather was a more complex man than I gave him credit for." "He was," I said. "He was the best." After I hung up, I sat on those porch steps for a long time. The choice was made. The fight was won. But the real work was just beginning. I looked out at the overgrown yard, at the crumbling house, at the deep woods beyond. It was a daunting task. It was overwhelming. For a moment, a flicker of the old fear returned. Could I do this? Alone? But then I thought of my grandfather, working for years in secret, saving every penny, restoring that beautiful truck in the dark. He did it alone. He did it for me. I could do this for him. I stood up, brushed the dust off my jeans, and walked back into the house. This time, I didn't hesitate at the bottom of the stairs. I climbed them, one creaking step at a time, ready to see the rest of my home. The weeks that followed were a blur of work. Hard, physical, satisfying work. The first thing I did was pay the back taxes. I drove the 40 miles to the county seat with a cashier's check that made the clerk's eyes widen. Handing it over felt like planting a flag. This land was mine, free and clear. I found a small room on the first floor of the house that was mostly weatherproof and made it my base camp. I bought a sleeping bag, a camp stove, and a cooler. I lived simply. Every morning, I woke up with the sun and a list of tasks. I started with the outside, clearing the overgrown brush from around the house. It took me a week of cutting and hauling to uncover the original stone foundation and a forgotten flower bed where stubborn, wild roses still bloomed. Each cleared patch of ground felt like a victory, like I was letting the house breathe again. I hired a local man named George, a semi-retired contractor whose father had known my grandfather, to inspect the house. He walked through with a thoughtful expression, tapping on walls and peering at beams. "She's got good bones," he said finally, his voice a gravelly comfort. "Your granddad built this place to last. The roof is shot, and you'll need new windows and wiring, but the foundation is solid. We can save her." We. The word was a gift. I wasn't alone in this. George helped me find a crew, Other locals who were willing to work for fair wages paid in cash from the green metal box. They started on the roof, and the sound of their hammers became the new heartbeat of the farm. I met people in town. When I went to the general store to buy supplies, the owner, a woman named Mary, recognized my name. "Vance," she'd said, her eyes lighting up. "You're Arthur's girl. He was so proud of you. Used to carry your school picture in his wallet." She showed me. It was a faded, dog-eared photo of a 7-year-old me with a gap-toothed smile. He had carried me with him all those years. The story of the city developers trying to buy up the land and the mysterious Vance heir who had turned them down had become a small-town legend. I was no longer an outsider. I was Arthur's granddaughter, the girl who had come home. One afternoon, George brought his son, a young mechanic named Jake, out to the barn. I had finally cleared the path enough to get a vehicle through. Jake walked around the old Ford truck, whistling in appreciation. "Wow," he said, running a hand over the fender just like I had. "Never seen one this clean. This isn't a truck. It's a time machine." He spent the afternoon working on it. He flushed the old fuel, installed a new battery, checked the fluids. Late in the day, he slid behind the wheel. "Okay," he said, looking at me. Moment of truth. He turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then, with a deep, throaty roar, it came to life. The sound filled the barn, a powerful, living rumble that vibrated through the floor and up into my bones. Jake grinned. I just stood there, tears welling in my eyes again. It was the sound of a promise being kept. It was the sound of a new beginning. That evening, I sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house was quiet, the work crew gone for the day. The air was filled with the scent of cut grass and pine. I thought about the word inheritance. For most of my life, I thought I had inherited nothing, a legacy of loss and absence. But my grandfather had left me so much more than land and money. He left me a story. He left me a choice. He left me the truth, that home isn't a place you are given, but a place you build. You build it with your own 2 hands, with sweat, with courage, and with love. And now, for the final time, I want to talk to you. I told you this story because I know I'm not the only one who has ever had to rebuild from nothing. Maybe you didn't find a hidden barn, but maybe you've had to find your own hidden strength. Maybe you've had to look at the ruins of your own life and make the choice not to sell out, not to walk away, but to stay and fight and build. The most valuable inheritance is the story we choose to live. You can be the person who was abandoned, or you can be the person who was protected. You can be the person who was a victim of circumstance, or you can be the person who took control of your own narrative. If my story has meant anything to you, if it has given you even a small piece of hope, then please subscribe and become part of this community. Share your own story in the comments below. Tell me about a time you chose the harder path, a time you decided to build instead of bail. I'll be reading them, because your story matters. We're all just trying to find our way home. And sometimes, we just need a map to show us where to start.